Pakistan's former leader returns home to appeal his corruption conviction. But can he succeed from behind bars? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Nawaz Sharif. As Pakistan's former Prime Minister touched down in Lahore, he knew he was heading for an arrest. After all, he'd already been convicted for corruption while taking care of his sick wife in London. Sharif has always maintained his innocence and blames his political enemies for his situation. But he's no stranger to controversy. His entire political career has been overshadowed by allegations of wrongdoing. So much so, he's never been able to complete a full term in office. So, are these latest charges against him justified, or could they have been trumped up by his political opponents? Here's Shoaib Hassan.
It began with euphoria but ended in carnage. An election rally in Pakistan's volatile southwestern Balochistan province, targeted by a suicide bomber. Dozens were killed, and it happened within hours of another deadly attack, this one on the convoy of one of Pakistan's most senior politicians. The bombings took place as former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif arrived in Pakistan from London, facing arrest after being convicted on corruption charges. There's also a general election on July the 25th.
Pakistan is at a decisive juncture, and I've done what's in my power. I know that I was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, and I'll be directly taken to jail. I want to tell Pakistanis that I've been doing this for you. I'm making this sacrifice for your future generations, for the future of Pakistan.
Nawaz Sharif has been elected Prime Minister of Pakistan 3 times, and each time has failed to complete his full term. Each term ended with charges of corruption and a rift with the military. The worst came in 1999, when he was deposed and exiled for life after a military coup. But he managed to return as main opposition leader in 2007 and then stormed back into power in 2013. That third stint initially stabilized Pakistan's faltering economy, but he's been on the back foot since a series of protests broke out in 2014. They were led by former cricketer turned politician Imran Khan. It was Khan who challenged Sharif's position as Prime Minister in court after it was revealed in leaked documents known as the Panama Papers that Sharif and his family had undisclosed offshore holdings worth millions of dollars. Pakistan's Supreme Court eventually removed Sharif as Prime Minister and barred him for life from running for public office. Earlier this month, he was convicted of corruption in absentia and sentenced to 10 years in prison. In a further blow, his daughter and heir apparent, Maryam Nawaz, was also sentenced to 7 years. Both were arrested soon after they landed in their home city of Lahore. It's a scenario in which Khan's PTI party believes they are now the only real political choice for the people.
I think the more important question is, why shouldn't they be voting for us? What are the other options that they have? They've tested PMLN. The leader's been announced, declared corrupt. He's now in prison. So the first and foremost thing is not about the performance in KPK. It's about the fact that you have a just leader at the top.
The KPK or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province has been ruled by Khan's party for the last 5 years. It was also a Pakistani Taliban and Daesh stronghold till a military operation starting in 2014 cleared them out. But Friday's attacks means the militants could be back as a major threat. The bombing in Balochistan's town of Mastoom killed more than 140 people, including Siraj Raisani, a tribal leader and top candidate for the area in the coming polls. But Akram Khan Durrani, a senior minister whose convoy was targeted near KPK's town of Bannu, survived.
This is our country. We should stand for the country. We should not compromise on our country. The important personalities are being targeted. It should be the top priority of the government to provide security to such leaders.
Critics pointed out the bombings took place as the country's security agencies were busy cracking down on PML activists. They had turned out in huge numbers in Lahore to welcome their leader.
I am ready to give the last drop of my blood. I am ready to face jail. I am ready to die. Let the police and their bullies do whatever they want to do. We're here to face it. We will not turn back.
Sharif's loyalists say the charges against him are false and that he's being punished for trying to enforce the supremacy of civilian rule over Pakistan's powerful military. The military denies it has anything to do with the former Prime Minister's recent misfortunes and is only ensuring security as directed by the Election Commission. So, will Nawaz Sharif and his party ever be able to return for another stint in power? And is the focus on the PMLN distracting security agencies from far deadlier challenges? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Islamabad by Zafrullah Khan. He's a barrister and former advisor to Nawaz Sharif. Also in Islamabad is Sayyid Zafar Ali Shah. He's a senator and a senior leader within Imran Khan's Tehreek-e-Insaf Party, or PTI. And completing our panel, also from Islamabad, is political analyst Musharraf Zaidi. Gentlemen, I'm going to begin with the same question to all of you. Let me start with Zafrullah Khan. The three-time Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, now in jail. Was his conviction and sentencing, in your opinion, I think I know where you stand, but it would be good to hear where you stand. Was it unfair and unjust?
First he was elected, and after 2 years he was sent home. Then again people elected him. Again he was sent home. And third time he was elected, again through a judicial process to which we don't agree. He is sent home, not only sent home, disqualified, and he is jailed. And he is disqualified to hold a public office, and he is disqualified to become a head of the party. All the laws which humanity has evolved over the years, right of fair hearing, right of fair trial, they have not been complied with. The judgment is based on presumptions, suppositions, circumstantial evidence without having any direct evidence. And he has not been given a proper treatment. And the Supreme Court was itself the originator of the case, itself was monitoring the case. I am a practicing lawyer, let me tell you, the first time in the history of Pakistan that a sitting judge of Supreme Court was monitoring a case on a daily basis.
Okay. So we know where you stand. Hold on.
Certainly,
because we have time constraints here, and I want to get through a lot here with all of you. We know where you stand on this issue. Sayyid Zafar Ali Shah, let me go to you. You were PMLN, now you're PTI. Do you accept that maybe Nawaz Sharif's conviction was unfair and unjust?
No, I don't think so. This is not unfair because this trial against me and Nawaz Sharif almost took 10 months, and full opportunity was given to Mr. Nawaz Sharif and his counsels. Firstly, before this trial, the Supreme Court of Pakistan, which is the apex court of the country, after disclosure of the Panama leakage throughout the world, firstly, and on the instance of me and Nawaz Sharif, first proceeding was Supreme Court taken the cognizance, and Supreme Court declared, as Mr. Zafrullah Khan just stating, that Supreme Court declared me and Nawaz Sharif disqualified, and he was ousted from the premiership. And after that, since the Supreme Court of Pakistan is not a trial court is a this NAB ordinance, National Accountability Bureau Courts.
You feel this was fair and this was just. Musharraf Zaidi, tell me where you stand, and within your answer, I want you to expand on the fact that we seem to be witnessing a crackdown on PMLN as well. Is that justified?
So I think, I think the world is not as black and white as we'd like it to be. I don't think there's any question that the judgment against both the disqualification judgment in July of 2017 and the conviction from the Accountability Court in July of 2018, both judgments are harsh. Both judgments can easily be seen as being unfair. But in terms of the process and the availability of opportunity to prevent any of this from happening, The Panama Papers came out in April of 2016, and it is now July of 2018. So it's over 2 years that former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and his family have had over 2 years to establish some sort of a case. They've tried to establish a political case for themselves, and their legal case has been rather shambolic. There have been consistent and constant contradictions between various members of the family. There have been some ridiculous attempts to backdate things that probably shouldn't have happened. So I think it's 6 of one and half a dozen of another.
Okay.
There has been undue harshness, and there has been a shocking degree of incompetence by the Sharifs in all this.
Okay, so
now,
Zafar,
as far as
Musharraf, let me come in there, and we'll get back to you in a moment. Let me bring in Zafarullah Khan. Would you at least accept that the PMLN and the Sharif family has bungled this from Fontgate after the Panama Papers and beyond, claiming political persecution, whereas maybe you should have just made a decent legal case to prove that he wasn't corrupt?
We had a best of lawyers. We did our level best. I myself am associated. Unfortunately, we have a very bad history of such judgments in Supreme Court of Pakistan, including Supreme Court of Pakistan. One of my learned seniors who is sitting with here, he went to the Supreme Court of Pakistan when the last time Nawaz Sharif was thrown out in the military coup. The Supreme Court of Pakistan justified military coup, and they gave the power to amend the constitution. So we have a very bad history of such politically motivated judgments in Pakistan. It's not we have done legal best effort we could have done, and we are very sure that this is not as such a legal case. In Panama Papers, 435 people were involved. Only one person is tried, 434 are out.
But only one person within that, certainly so, but only one person within that was the Prime Minister of Pakistan at the time, Syed Zafar Ali Shah.
Of course.
Okay, let me bring in Syed Zafar Ali Shah and ask about what seems to be a clampdown at the moment on PMLN. Hundreds of their supporters arrested. We had Nawaz Sharif talking from the UAE before he landed in Pakistan, saying that the state is being run by a state above the state. And so there's a feeling that, you know what, the army calls the shots, and the army's choice for the next leader is the man whose picture we see behind you and the man you support, Imran Khan, and so they're getting Nawaz Sharif out of the way. Is that accurate and fair?
I don't think so, but even then I don't know what are the secret of the state and what the army is doing and what the Nawaz Sharif is doing. As you said that Nawaz Sharif, when reached here in Lahore, Nawaz Sharif was not coming as a free citizen. He was convicted. He was convicted by the competent court of law. And it was not supposed to, the million of people can go on airport and receive him. He was not supposed, and they were not allowed to do so. So we can't say, as my learned friend Mr. Zafarullah Khan said, when I first, when Nawaz Sharif was thrown from the government first time, that was victimization. That was martial law. That was coup against the constitutional government. But at this time, it is a case of money laundering. It is a case of corruption.
Okay, but you don't believe that anybody
can't say that.
Okay, you don't believe that the path is being paved for Imran Khan. Let me then ask you that question in a different way. Are you confident ahead of the elections that the competition is being sidelined?
Competition is apparently which we are looking that competition is between PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, and the Pakistan Muslim League Noon, which is now at the time headed by Mr. Shahbaz Sharif, who is the younger brother of Mr. Nawaz Sharif. So competition is there, particularly within the biggest province of the country, that's Punjab.
Okay, Musharraf Zaidi, let me ask you, we've had those horrible attacks. Daesh claimed responsibility. We also had Pakistani Taliban claiming responsibility. More than 130 people killed, as far as I understand. It was on the day of the arrest of Nawaz Sharif, in the build-up to an election. And of course, you still have a lot of PMLN supporters, this being not quite connected, but still in the build-up to the election, who are very angry that Nawaz Sharif is arrested, that Maryam Nawaz has been arrested. What does all of this that's happening tell us about the build-up to that election and what the temperature and the atmosphere of the country is right now, Musharraf?
Well, I mean, there's two ways to look at this. You know, Pakistan has suffered repeated interventions in its democratic process over its 70-year history. One way of looking at what's happening now is to understand it within the longer arc of history. And within the longer arc of history, it's actually encouraging that the military, if we are to accept the allegations, and I think some of them, they do ring true, that the military is from behind the scenes trying to certainly exert some pressure on people to not support the PMLN, to not run on the PMLN ticket. Then the fact that it's having to do so from behind the scenes and the fact that it's apologetic about it means that the rules of the game in Pakistan have changed. It used to be that the military, and particularly military dictators, could get up in the morning and depending on what side of the bed they woke up on, they could choose to do whatever they wanted. The judiciary would do exactly as they say. Now, of course, the PMLN supporters claim that that's exactly what's happening, but there's plenty of voices in Pakistan that don't agree with the PMLN's point of view. I do think the PMLN has been treated slightly harshly. I do think that the PMLN has been incredibly incompetent. But at the end of the day, if the election day remains reasonably peaceful and the process is reasonably transparent and fair in terms of people being allowed to cast their ballot, and if we somehow manage a decent turnout, for which I think we'll need really good security and a stop to the kind of thing that happened in Mastung, where so many Pakistanis were martyred, then I think we might be able to squeeze out a victory for the country regardless of who wins the election. And that is the sustenance of our democratic process and a third consecutive election, which is a big deal.
Certainly. Zafarullah Khan, are you still optimistic ahead of those elections, or are you going to lose clearly?
We are optimistic. We have performed well. We now have a new narrative that let the people decide. I agree there were some direct interventions, as you had the last in 1981. But then you had a new form of the coup. When the Arbakan was out, it was called the postmodern coup. We are facing a now postmodern coup. Our leader is in jail. Ex-ministers are being daily quizzed by the investigation agencies. We have a bomb threat per day. Hundreds and hundreds of our supporters are being arrested. Our candidates are in jail. So what we can say, is it a fair playing field? All the difficulties are being created in our way and other parties, and all the facilitation is being created, enabling environment being created by the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, led by Imran Khan.
Okay.
So I don't think it's level playing field, but still we think we will fight. We have no other option except to fight in the larger interest of the civil-military relations, and ultimately people will win.
Okay, very finally, Syed Zafar Ali Shah, for those who point out the fact that Nawaz Sharif is in jail for not declaring some properties worth a few million, but someone like Hafiz Muhammad Saeed, accused of being involved in the Mumbai terror attacks, killing innocent people, is actually campaigning in this election as some sort of example of the injustice and the unfairness. Your response is what?
Hafiz Muhammad Saeed was one of the best supporter of Nawaz Sharif. In all the previous election, he and his party supported with full heart. Now I can't say why the Hafiz Saeed is against Nawaz Sharif and Nawaz Sharif is against Hafiz Saeed. But Hafiz Saeed is a religious leader. In this election, both the leaders are opponent with each other. I don't think what is the reason, that I don't know. But if the election, and there is also there is a apprehension that Nawaz Sharif, at the last day of the election, he and the other leader of a political party, that's Pakistan People's Party, Zardari, both leaders can boycott the election of Pakistan, which are going to be held on.
Okay, there is some apprehension, but so far no clear evidence, certainly, no clear evidence of a boycott from the PPP or PMLN. We'll be watching the election closely. We'll see how all of this plays out. But gentlemen, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Zafrullah Khan, Saeed Zafar Ali Shah and Musharraf Zaidi. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Still to come on the Newsmakers, 2 years after a failed coup, Turkey gets set to lift its state of emergency. But were those powers wielded too widely? And FIFA declares Russia's World Cup the best in history. So were the critics wrong? And does everyone owe Moscow an apology? For the last 2 years, Turkey has been in a state of emergency. But this week, that comes to an end. As the country commemorated the second anniversary of a failed coup that killed hundreds of civilians, Ankara declared the end of emergency rule. It's been a contentious issue that has dogged the government of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. His critics accuse the ruling party of using emergency powers to silence dissent. But his supporters say it's not only been justified, but essential for the security of Turkey. So, did the government's response to the failed coup achieve its aims in restoring security to the country? Sandra Gutman explores.
It was one of Turkey's darkest hours. Tanks and soldiers blocked Istanbul's Bosphorus Bridge and took over its international airport. Fighter jets swarmed the skies and bombed the parliament building in Turkey's capital, Ankara. But in the end, thousands of civilians took to the streets to stop the coup. 2 years on, Turkey is commemorating one of the deadliest attempted overthrows in its history.
251 vatandaşımızı bir gecede kaybetmenin hüznünü tekrar yaşarken, diğer taraftan da dünyada eşine az rastlanır bir direnişe imza atmanın gururunu yaşıyoruz.
Turkey's history has often been marked by violent military coups. But while this last attempt ended in failure, it did signal the start of a new era in Turkey that began under a state of emergency.
Just 4 days after the failed coup, emergency rule came into force in Turkey, allowing security officials to begin a clampdown on those believed responsible. The alleged culprits were supporters and members of a secretive network known in Turkey as FETÖ, led by cleric and businessman Fethullah Gulen, who lives in self-imposed exile in the US. While he denies involvement, his supporters were found to have infiltrated the military, public sector, and other institutions over decades. The next 2 years saw about 50,000 people arrested. Another 100,000 lost their jobs, including civil servants, soldiers, police officers, judges, journalists, and teachers. So far, around 1,000 people have been returned to their jobs. But the operation was criticized for being too heavy-handed. Turkey's political opponents have condemned the detention of suspects without trial. They also claim that they, in turn, have become targets for questioning the course of justice.
Those who are in opposition and seeking justice are declared terrorists. I'm a terrorist then.
The scale of Turkey's security operation also came under fire internationally.
Clearly, the successive states of emergency declared in Turkey have been used to severely and arbitrarily curtail the human rights of a very large number of people.
It undermines the push for justice, actually, for those who have suffered on the 15th of July 2016.
Others argue that perhaps this particular enemy of the state required a major maneuver.
It seems from the government point of view it was absolutely necessary because they needed swift decisions and swift action. Whatever injustices occurred should be rectified, but given the fact that the danger of what had happened that night and how determined they were and how merciless they were in terms of people and civilian lives, I think Turkey had to do that.
experts say Turkey's 2-year-long security sweep against FETÖ is largely over. But security officials have been rounding up suspects abroad in more than 30 countries.
What Turkey needs to still do a lot of work internationally to weaken their network, because they're still there and live and still probably controlling their financial means and international network.
Before his re-election last month, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan made a campaign pledge to lift the state of emergency. And this week it will come to an end, but Turkey's leadership hasn't ruled out imposing it in the future.
If you are faced with a very extraordinary threat, the state of emergency mechanism can be declared again.
And as many Turks will tell you, a lot can happen in a country that's historically suffered great turbulence. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, with me here in the studio, we have Onur Erim. He's a political advisor and author. Next to him is Ahmed Kasimhan. He's an international relations professor at Kadir Has University. And completing our panel is Andrew Gardner. He's Amnesty International strategy and research manager for Turkey. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us. Let me start with you, Onur. 2 years on from that failed coup, is Turkey in a better place? Has it changed for the better?
Well, it definitely changed for the better if you look at it from the perspective of getting rid of the FETÖ organization, or at least, you know, slashing onto it in a deeper way. Do we have a long way to go? I think so. I think part of the President Erdogan's speech yesterday emphasized on that. Yes, we're definitely in a better spot. Are we feeling the effects of fighting such a big terrorist organization that is organized almost in the entire world? Yes, we are. I think we're going to suffer from it a little bit more. But to answer your question, we're in a better place than we were 2 years ago.
Ahmed Kasimhan?
Well, I think it's a multifaceted score. I have to say that we are in a better place, as I would agree with the previous speaker, on where we are fighting the FETÖ terrorist organization. But are we better off in terms of where we are, considering civic liberties, considering the rule of law? That is something that we have to be more careful on.
Being more careful, let's get the perspective from Amnesty International on human rights. Andrew Gardner. So, state of emergency ending, 2 years on. Democracy still standing. I guess if the coup had to succeed, you would have had a kind of nefarious military, almost the Gulen organization, FETÖ, like a crime syndicate running the place. So, in that sense, better off. Are you willing to give credit where it's due and say that 2 years on, Turkey is, I guess, better off?
I think if the coup attempt was successful, it would be an absolute disaster for human rights in Turkey. You know, we can't even contemplate what the consequences would have been if the coup attempt was successful. But fortunately, it was prevented. This contemptible coup attempt was prevented, and it was right in these circumstances for any government to declare a state of emergency. But a state of emergency should be temporary, and it should be used for particular reasons to counter threats to national security. Unfortunately, what we've seen in Turkey is that the state of emergency has been abused, and instead of targeting people who were responsible for the coup attempt, journalists, activists, and many others have been targeted. Over 100,000 people have been dismissed, organizations have been shut down, permanently shut down, and these people had nothing to do with terrorism or the coup attempt. And even if the state of emergency is lifted, these disastrous effects will stay in place.
And for those who say thousands have been reinstated through the State of Emergency Procedures Investigation Commission, they reviewed the purges and they said, okay, well, you know, some people who were fired, some people who were sacked can get their jobs back because we're going to review your case individually. Is there a silver lining there, even though you felt that post-failed coup, things were heavy-handed?
Well, more than 125,000 people have been dismissed arbitrarily through emergency decree without any evidence being presented whatsoever. Now, the commission has been established, more than 1,000 people have got their jobs back, which is obviously a good thing. But if you consider that 1,000 people have got their jobs back versus 130,000 who've been dismissed, it's clearly not enough.
Okay, so Onur Erim, the man makes a good point, right? He's using the word arbitrarily, not lightly, because he's saying you lost your job and nobody told you why. Is that fair?
No, it's not.
Tell me why.
Well, here's the reason. If we are here to discuss the imperfections of the Turkish justice system, yes, I would agree with a lot of things, especially the time that it takes for a court to rule upon any issue. I am actually one of those on my commercial side, my business, suffering from it because a simple rule that I need to get done for my business to continue hasn't been given for the last 8 months. What the guest to my far right has been saying about people being
geographically, not politically.
Geographically, of course. Well, I guess that the people are in jail or are in courts without any evidence. No. It's just the imperfections of the justice system. And there is a lot of things imperfect about it right now, especially with the time issue, that there's nothing been presented yet. It will take some time, yes. You have to realize, first of all, this particular case cannot be compared to anything around the world. It is a case, it is an attack that had been in the makings for the last 40 years. It definitely has some international backings. So this is not going to go over away.
Let me ask Andrew, because you mentioned the numbers, right? Is it just that, given the nefariousness of the organization and how they worked, that perhaps those numbers are justified? This is how they worked within the system, and this needed to be done.
Those numbers would be absolutely justified if there was evidence against the people. But the fact is that there are tens of thousands of people in prison, either awaiting trial or as the trials continue. And what we've seen is that since the coup attempt, since the declaration of the state of emergency, the judiciary is being completely hollowed out. Judges have been dismissed, prosecutors have been dismissed, and the judiciary is under immense political pressure. And in these circumstances, it isn't possible for people to get a fair trial. There are many thousands of people who are in prison without any credible evidence against them. One of them is the chair of Amnesty International Turkey. He's been on trial now for nearly a year. He's been in prison for 13 months without any credible evidence against him, not a single piece.
Ahmed Kasimhan, the judiciary has been hollowed out since the failed coup of 2 years ago. Is that true?
Well, I would not say that is true. Somehow, overlapping with my geographical position, I stand in between the two guests on this issue. Let's see what happened. As has been repeatedly said, this was a traumatic experience for Turkish society, and it's unlike anything that we have seen in modern history anywhere in Europe or in the Western world. And as such, I do understand that relating to it is very hard for the Western observers.
They worked in the shadows.
They worked in the shadows. A standing army. Such an occultistic organization has not been seen in the West for almost a couple of hundreds of years.
Do you feel they failed to understand it, or how they work?
I think to an extent they failed to understand.
But wasn't that also the fault of the Turkish government in failing to properly articulate the type of threat it was facing?
I mean, that would have been my second sentence following my first comment. Definitely so. But nevertheless, I do understand and empathize with our Western audience when it comes to understanding the gravity of what has happened in Turkey, the nature of this organization, so on and so forth. And this has been in the offing for 40 years. That also is correct. Even though it has accelerated in the past 15, 16 years, this organization has been infiltrating to the state mechanism with the explicit vision of overtaking the Turkish state. Now, if you look at the matter from that perspective, you would understand, and not meant as an apology, but you would understand, or you could at least empathize with the fact that these kind of corrective trends or corrective measures tend to overtake the reality of the situation. They tend to overshoot. And in this case, it has overshot. Plus, the Turkish state has been hollowed out by this organization. So taking the members of the organization out of the bureaucracy, including but not limited to judiciary, also created an hollowing out effect. And add on top of this the trauma that different segments of Turkish society has gone through over what has happened, you would see that the situation is not something that is foreseeable or there is no, if I may, best case of dealing with such an organization.
Okay.
Turkish Islamists are finding themselves in a very perplexed situation in the face of what has been happening, because this organization has been propagating its Islamic contours to do what it has been doing. And seculars are also traumatized in a different way.
Yeah, and this is interesting because something that Ibrahim Kalin, the presidential spokesperson, had mentioned was the fact that this organization had sort of, I guess, piggybacked on people's religious fervor and their religious sincerity, right? What he had said on Nur Erim is this. He said, "Today the Gulenist invasion of the hearts and minds of honest, hardworking Turks has completely ended. We have broken FETÖ's siege on our country's public institutions and civil society." In your first answer, you said it's not quite done yet. There's still a threat. So tell me why you're not as bullish over defeating them as Erdogan spokesman Ibrahim Kalin is.
I just want to be hesitant because we now know, at least I am certain, that this organization had been backed up by or a number of international organizations or governments in the past 40 years.
Was that maybe naivety rather than something more sinister?
Oh, especially not in the last 2 years.
They saw him standing for interfaith and so forth within the US, and they thought, oh, this is a nice palatable face of Islam.
Beyond that, the mere fact that the US government, after numerous attempts by the Turkish Justice Department and the government itself on his extradition, and the US government hasn't even taken him for questioning, I think to me proves that there is something involved within the US government, not necessarily POTUS, or at least the current one, that there is involvement of the US government with this organization at some level.
Okay.
So this tells me that it's going to take a long time for this to get resolved.
Or is it rather the fact that Ahmed Kasim Khan, that Turkey hasn't made a strong enough case maybe to show that Gulen is directly connected to it, and it's difficult to make that case. You can show Gulenist involvement throughout the night, Gulenist FETÖ being in tanks and so forth, but it's very difficult to make that connection that the orders came from Pennsylvania, and you have to pass that legal standard for extradition.
Look, Imran, not only that, but also I believe that the approach that has been taken by the Turkish official authorities regarding fighting this FETÖist organization, which is a menace, no doubt about that. It's a ferociously vicious organization, no doubt about that. But exactly because of that, the judicial procedures that has been executed right after the coup should have had been more transparent than they had been. And there should have been a very clear discrimination of all those groups that have been involved in these in the attempt of the 15th of July.
You believe it was more than just the Gulenists?
No, I do believe that the lump sum approach of the rule by decree system that has been brought forward since the coup attempt itself has created an atmosphere which is assiduous exactly to Turkey's rightful fight against the FETÖist organization.
And which brings me to the question, Andrew Gardner, because the state of emergency wasn't only to try and defang the threat, the Gulenist threat within the military, within the police, within the judiciary and so forth. The state of emergency was also to keep Turkey safe from Daesh attacks and PKK attacks and so forth. So it's ending, it's ended, and it's about to properly, formally end. For you, as Amnesty International, what needs to happen after that for you to feel you're happier about the response to the failed coup and what happens after the state of emergency?
The problem is that although the state of emergency was declared in order to fight terrorism and to fight FETÖ, it's affected the lives of ordinary people. So many people have been put in prison without evidence. Journalists have been targeted, activists have been targeted. Just for example, there is a ban on any form of events being carried out by LGBT organizations, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender organizations. This is an example of how the state of emergency has been abused for reasons which it was never intended to happen. What needs to happen now is that all these abusive measures that were brought in during the state of emergency, which should be temporary, but are in fact permanent, need to be abolished at the same time. So all the people dismissed under the state of emergency, they will stay dismissed. So there needs to be reforms to get Turkey back on the track of respecting human rights. The climate of fear that has engulfed Turkey over the last 2 years needs to be lifted. There needs to be a situation where civil society, which was once flourishing in Turkey, which is now sort of not able to carry out its legitimate work, whether that can, civil society can work again. If all these things are put in place, then Turkey is going on a very correct path. But unfortunately, that's not what we see at the moment.
Onur, do you accept and respect that? He's not saying it's all terrible. He's saying there's a bit of, I don't know, mission creep or overkill going on.
You know what this thing comes about, because I was in Istanbul airport, right, where the president landed at the night. You know, I was deployed by the military. Somebody that has lived it right to the bone. What I have to keep reminding myself, and probably everybody, all friends across the world, is that this is a very, very different coup attempt. You cannot explain it, nor can you expect the regular rule of law with every other thing around the world when it comes to this.
Why can't you do it within the rule of law?
Because everything was out of rule. Show me one other country in the world, one other historical event where a coup plotters or the pushists have attacked their own people with nothing, no arms. Show me one other case in the history of the world that people with their bare hands stood in front of tanks. So this is a very, very unusual case. Nobody questioned 1/10 of this when U.S. Guantanamo Bay. Nobody questions France today when there's a permanent state of emergency.
But I mean, people do question.
Not that this gives Turkey the right to go over the rule of law.
Right.
But all I'm saying is it is not as bad as some of the people in Turkey or outside of Turkey make it to be. But at the same time, everybody has to realize, everybody has to understand what exactly happened here on the night of July 15th.
Ahmed Kasim Khan, I'm completely out of time. I have to ask for extra time from my producer. So in 30 seconds, please, can you wrap us up?
Well, I think the key word here is permanent versus temporary, lump sum versus very detailed work. What has been happening by rule by decree is that the state of emergency was declared against the terrorist organizations that Turkey was facing, including but not limited to the FETÖist organization. So the emergency decrees, the state of emergency decrees, should have focused on those organizations and should have exclusively been about fighting those terrorist organizations. Whereas the approach taken by the state of emergency decrees have been a very lump sum approach. Everything has been managed or politically solved through state of emergency laws since 2 years. This has to end, and it's ending. And I think it is also unfair for the resilience of the Turkish democracy, which has proven itself exactly on that very night. Because the strength of a country, in my opinion, Imran, lies in the way that it can handle challenges, even extravagant challenges, under normal conditions. And Turkey is able to do that.
That was an extraordinary challenge for this entire nation. It's been 2 years. It's almost hard to believe sometimes. Onur Erim, Andrew Gardner, and Ahmed Kasim Khan. This was an important conversation to have. I thank you all for joining us here.
I think the comparison with 1936 is certainly right, and I think it's an emetic prospect, frankly, to think of Putin glorying in this sporting event.
That was Boris Johnson comparing the prospect of a Russian World Cup to Hitler's Olympics, and he may now be eating his words. In the run-up to the event, tabloids were rife with fears of hooliganism and questioned how a country with such a questionable human rights record could be given such a prestigious event. But the tournament went off almost without a hitch. In fact, FIFA's president called it the best one in history. So is Russia owed an apology, or did the tournament simply whitewash abuses by the Kremlin? Let's ask our panel. Joining us from Moscow is political analyst Maria Lipman. And from London, we have member of the British Parliament for the Labour Party, Toby Perkins. I thank you both for joining us. Toby, let me start with you. Boris Johnson's comments after that World Cup sound a little silly now, don't they?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think his comments were silly in so much as he was suggesting that England may pull out, which I didn't think was ever realistic at that stage. But I had been one of those 2 years before this, saying that as Russia were operating in a way, not just in terms of the human rights violations at home, but much more about their role overseas with issues like the murder of British citizens on British soil, with the annexation of Crimea, with the murder of Sergei Magnitsky and many other examples of Russian aggression overseas, that as they were continuing to operate as a pariah society, they shouldn't be given the prestige of hosting the World Cup. Now, it was never a case of saying that they were a country that wouldn't be capable of hosting one, but it was saying that the international community should be taking a stance.
But they had it. Is there any evidence that they overtly politicized the World Cup in order to push any of those issues? Or would you concede that, no, they didn't?
I think that the World Cup was broadly a success. I mean, of course, we saw Putin there shielding under his umbrella as the Croatian premier bravely faced the rain. But broadly, it was a PR success for Russia, I believe. But that was never the point that I was making at the time.
Okay, so Maria Lipman, we still have the criticism from Toby Perkins saying that Russia shouldn't have had it in the first place. And even though within the paradigm of the tournament, we didn't see the homophobia, the racism, the issues of Crimea or whatever it is. We didn't see any of that, but that's irrelevant because Russia still shouldn't have had it. How do you feel about it?
Well, I think it's a great thing that Russia had it for a number of reasons. I think if there had been a boycott, I don't think this was in any way to have been expected, but if Russia had been boycotted, the World Cup would have been. I wonder who would have benefited. I wonder why antagonizing Russia even further makes the world a better place or a more secure one. And also, I think this World Cup, which certainly was a success, and not just in terms of PR. It was a fun event for many people from all over the world to be able to come to Russia, to rejoice, to witness excellent soccer, to enjoy the hospitality of the Russian people, show the world a different Russia or another aspect of Russia. This would not be to whitewash any of the obvious things that cause criticism upon Russia, probably deserved. But there is another aspect of Russia that the world cannot see because of how the Western media cover Russia, always giving it a very ugly look. And now, you know, Russia was hospitable, it was open, it was welcoming, it was happy, and none of the unpleasant issues that you mentioned were actually in any way apparent during the World Cup.
Toby? Any of what Maria's saying resonate with you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that I would agree with there. I mean, I think, you know, it's never been my argument that the Russians are bad people, and what we saw there was entirely correct, that it was a welcoming opportunity for people to enjoy this festival of football. And it's absolutely true that there's many good Russian people that want to see Russia being more open with the rest of the world. I think where I would disagree is that I think the very awarding of the World Cup to Russia, and the sense that the footballing and global community was willing to simply overlook all of the abuses that I referred to previously in the name of enjoying the festival of football, is where the problem existed. I was never suggesting that people should boycott the Russian World Cup. I was suggesting that FIFA should move it elsewhere, and that governments should put pressure on FIFA to move it elsewhere until Russia were able to act in a way that increased the global security rather than reduced it. And it's not about wanting to antagonize Russia, but it is about recognizing that you can't, on the one hand, increase the global insecurity, and on the other hand, be treated as a nation that gains the prestige of hosting the World Cup. But I think it did show the Russian people in a very good light.
Okay, Maria, like all the others of hundreds of millions of people, or maybe even billions of people who were watching yesterday, we all got a little glimpse of some streakers onto the field. They were Pussy Riot, as far as I understand. Have a little listen to what Pussy Riot had to say about this World Cup, and I'll get a response from you afterwards. Maria?
The World Cup has shown wonderfully what the police can be like in Russia. But what will happen afterwards?
Okay, so, Maria, we have Olga Kuracheva going from Pussy Riot that, okay, you know what, the police were kind of not so bad during this World Cup and everything was sort of okay, but let's see what happens afterwards, right? Let me honestly ask you, okay, it was a successful month, Maria, but will that spirit of openness and maybe the softer approach, particularly from Russian police, will that endure after the World Cup?
Probably not. I think the world and Russia will go back to the usual. I think if the NATO summit is any indication, that the perception of Russia in the world, among the world leaders, has not changed because of this very successful World Cup. The resolution of NATO sees Russia as a threat, as before, has a long list of accusations for all kinds of crimes and sins, and never shows even a glimpse of desire to share the responsibility for the current confrontation, because I'm positive that at least part of the world is on the West, not all on Russia. So if that is any indication, I think the success of the World Cup will remain as pleasant memories, as happy memories for Russians and all the guests and fans and tourists, but it will not affect the international relations and the way Russia is perceived and treated by the West.
Okay. Well, let's keep that short and sharp. It's been a pleasure having both of you on the Newsmakers, Maria Lipman and Toby Perkins. Hope to have you on again. Thanks for joining us. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Trump and Putin meet in Finland. Could this historic summit bring America and Russia closer together? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.